Attachment to what? Your most important map of the world, part 2. We may have a part 3, I'm not sure, but at the very least, watch part 1 before you watch part 2, and then you can finish up here. This is all about your attachment style and your attachment map. One of the most important mental maps, mental models of the world that we build. And the attachment model that we build by age 2 is the same attachment model that we die with for 75% of most people. So it's a very long-lasting, sort of semi-permanent map that we build about the world to represent how things are. If you want to know more, watch this video. Hello, my name is Jesse. This is the channel Open Source Owners, where we talk about what would it be like if humans had an owner's manual. All right, so remember from part 1, attachment is all about our attachment to other people, and it's primarily set up with, as a child, when we are born, we don't have any mental modes, we don't have any mental maps of the world, so we have to build a construction of the world, sort of, if you will, an internal construction that represents what the world is like. Who sets that up for you as a child more than your primary caregivers or parents? And the answer is nobody. That's pretty much where it comes from. The people who are responsible for taking care of your basic daily needs most of the time throughout your 0 to 2 ages of year. And that is the primary caregivers, which is often referred to because not everybody has parents, or maybe they have a different conception of parents. I'm going to use the word parent just as a general covering all the bases of whoever it was that raised you, okay, or took care of your daily needs. So the primary caregiver's role in setting up the 4 attachment styles looks like this. Really quickly, there are 4 attachment styles, but there are only 2 types of attachment. There's secure and there's insecure. And there's 3 insecure types of attachment, and those will be in red, okay? So let's get on with it. So secure. So again, this is what the caregivers or the parents were doing with you as a child, or anybody you know. This is how it sets up a secure attachment in a child's brain. This is what the caregivers or the parents were doing. So parents routinely met the child's cries or needs with eye contact, attention, touch, and curiosity. Well, that makes sense. Notice it says routinely. It doesn't say always. They don't have to be some type of perfect angel parent to set up secure attachment. You just have to routinely do this with the child. The other thing to say about this that I didn't write down is secure modeling will allow the child to express individual freedom. So it'll let the child sort of crawl around and explore the world on its own while keeping a watchful eye. And then it gives sort of space and freedom that's appropriate. And then when the child comes back, there's a reunion, and the reunion is matching the child's needs. So if the child is crying, the reunion is like soft and supportive and it's okay, I'm here with you. If the child is excited, you match their excitement. So that's kind of the main thing, is you allow freedom in an appropriate boundaried way with a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old, but then you also welcome them back without remuneration. Okay. So what are the primary parents doing to set up an anxious attachment style? Remember, this is the one that has a negative self-concept and a positive concept of other. So parents are inconsistent and potentially self-absorbed. So you could be self-absorbed in many ways. So just consider that they might be self-absorbed, maybe in their own anxiety. Maybe dad is a narcissist and he's absorbed in his own sort of just self-image. The child learns that when mom or dad is happy, I can be happy too. And this is critical. This is a total reversal of what it should be like according to just, attachment models and understanding childhood development. The child should be soothed, right? The child's needs should be primary, and the parents wrap themselves and contort themselves to meet the child's needs, not the other way around. And in the anxious attachment style, the child is learning to conform their emotional landscape, their behavior, etc., to the parent. So it's flipped. The roles are reversed here, right? Helicopter parenting might set this up. That's pretty common, that type of like over smothering, over attention, over concern if the child gets slightly hurt or something like that. And parents might over fuss about small things, confusing the child about their own inner needs. So the child stubs their toe and the parent might be like, oh, no, and like pick them up and grab them. No, don't you ever do that again. And the child that's discordant with what actually happened, which the child just fell or stubbed their toe and they were crying, but it wasn't that big a deal. It's a normal sort of thing that children always do. The parent turned it into a level 10, shutdown event or something like that. So those are the sort of typical, and obviously we can't cover everything here, but it gets you thinking about what is happening in that primary caregiver role that sets up this anxious attachment style? I will say, working in clinical work, I see very commonly people with an anxious attachment style had one or another parent that also had an anxious attachment style. And you might lazily call that like a genetic inheritance, but it's really not. It's more of a learned epigenetic phenomenon. It's a modeling event. Okay, so the dismissing attachment, remember dismissing is sort of the opposite to the anxious. So dismissing has a positive self-image and a negative image of other. The parents are neglectful or not around often. So maybe it's like mom worked, it was a single family home and mom was the only parent at the home, but mom had to work 2 or 3 jobs. So it's not that the mom was neglectful of the child on purpose. It's just that the child experienced neglect because mom had to pay the bills and was like always gone. Okay. So the child might feel like they raised themselves or had to raise their siblings in this case. Often it is the adult who says, well, I had to make sure my younger brother got fed in the morning or picked up after school. But it's like you as the dismissing attachment adult now had to become an adultified version of your childhood self way too quickly, way too early. So you're competent. You look like you can get things done. You can pay your bills. You can, like make money. You can make sure the children are on the, you can make sure that everybody has food and everybody's needs are taken care of. So you look outwardly competent, but inwardly you sort of don't trust other. Parents might praise superficial aspects of their child, but ignore or shame their emotional needs. So it's like, as a son, you might be like praised for your physicality, your sportsness or something like that. But when you become vulnerable or sad or scared or curious or, like expressing more of the artistic nature of yourself, that might not get met at all. And in fact, that might cause the parent to give you like a cold shoulder or a neglectful signal. And so the child just learns, oh, okay, that part of me is like not welcome here. So they sort of exile them into some other part of themselves. And now I'm using the internal family systems language there because it really helps make sense of that. You don't have to know what I was talking about there, but the idea is, I think, pretty clear. The other thing to say about dismissing, often it can be parents had a special needs child that wasn't you. And so that special needs child just got more attention because they needed a lot more attention. They needed a lot more care. They needed a lot more help. They sort of like took up all the oxygen in the household. And you, as the other child, may have just been feeling like, well, when do I get my needs met? When do I get my attention met? So you learn to sort of like down-regulate and suppress your sort of need for emotional attachment in those ways. Sometimes this can be a result of like military style families or families that move a lot. So the child just feels like they're always getting drug around and they never feel like they really get their needs met. And as a part of their response to that, they naturally go into dissociation and shutdown mode. Often they can go deeply into the recesses of their own imagination, which is another feature of the dismissing attachment, or it can be. Okay, disorganized. This is the last one. Remember, the anxious, dismissing, and disorganized are the insecure styles of attachment, and secure is the only single form of secure attachment. So disorganized, it has a negative self-concept and a negative concept of other. Okay, what sets this up? The parents are often chaotic or unpredictable. There's a very commonly violence, abuse, or undiagnosed mental illness within the parents, and emotional neglect or abuse sort of typify the household, right? The child feels that life is chaos or scary by nature. It just feels like I never know what to expect in this world. And so I'm always hypervigilant. And that somehow that chaos and that scariness is connected to love. Because that's what the parents model, right, is what love means to you. So it can mean, loving, supportive embrace, or it can mean friction and tension and abuse or yelling. Closeness and intimacy become ridden with fear of what chaos will come next, right? So there might be, and there often is, moments of like true tenderness and like being accepted for who we are and like being the child really being truly seen by the parent. But because it's so chaotic and unpredictable otherwise, it sort of feels like, okay, this is nice for now, but when's the other shoe going to drop? And the shoe does drop in these scenarios where the next moment the child is terrified again. And chaos becomes really how love is expressed. So you can imagine in adult relationships, which we'll talk about here next, how love becomes synonymous with chaos or fights or yelling or violence or neglect, these types of things, right? So again, we're talking about parents with alcoholism or some type of addiction issues, undiagnosed trauma of their own or PTSD of their own. Many times it's like, Only years later did the adult who grew up in this scenario realize, well, gosh, my mom had like mania and it was just undiagnosed. Nobody knew. Or dad was actually schizophrenic and nobody knew. It was like terrifying to be around, but it was just missed. Society sort of had let it slide somehow. And that child was essentially, even though they might have been living in a wonderful town or a wonderful country with no war, they were living in a war zone. Okay, so now let's flip the script. That was what the parents were doing to set up, 0 to 2. Remember, adult attachment styles get fixed by age 2. So the mental model of your attachment of the other people and yourself gets stopped at age 2. It gets developed at age 2. And then unless we challenge that later, typically through therapy or something like therapy, that will just remain the same attachment style that we carry into the rest of the life. So as we carry that into the rest of our life, what does it look like as an adult, right? So now you watching this video, you're an adult, presumably. So how might this play out in your adult relationships? So let's look at that. So the secure model plays out like this. You tend to be comfortable in committed relationships, being loving parents. You're not withholding love from your child or using love as a tool of punishment. And you're able to admit that you did wrong without it shaking the core sense of self. So it doesn't mean you're perfect, right? But eventually, if your partner is expressing, hey, that thing you did hurt me, eventually you'll say, you know what, I'm really sorry. I did not mean to hurt you. I'll try to learn from that and not do that again, etc. And it doesn't shake your fundamental belief in yourself. You're able to admit fault, feel that little bit of embarrassment or shame or guilt, and then learn from that and actually grow from that. That's kind of what typifies the secure attachment. You are also able to be emotionally intimate with others. So when somebody opens up to you, their trauma, their wounds, their fears, you're able to match them and be there without it being like, this is too uncomfortable. I am not comfortable with this space in the human psyche. That would typify some of the insecure attachment models. You're able to give love freely. You are able to hold on and let go. So imagine your partner goes out on a girls' night with her girlfriends, right? You're able to be like, yeah, that's wonderful for you, honey. Like, go out, have fun, have a blast. So you let them go out and explore the world on their own, and you're happy for them because you know that is something that builds them up inside. But when they come back, you're happy to see them. You're not holding some sort of like cold shoulder treatment, or you're not trying to like get your emotional needs met through some type of like emotional signaling that isn't clear and concise. Instead, you're just truly welcoming and happy to have them back. Same thing is true of the children. Children when they get a little bit older and they start going out and spend the night at their friend's house and stuff, you're super happy to have them back, but you're also happy to have them go, provided that it is safe and boundaried, right? So as an adult, if you have an anxious attachment style as an adult, so now we're thinking about you're 18 or older, this adult often has the background sense of anxiety. So if you would agree with this statement that I always feel anxious, that might be a good indicator that you have an anxious attachment style. Especially if somebody said to you, well, what are you anxious about? And you said, I have no idea. There's not a thing that I'm anxious about. Then you might in fact have an anxious attachment style. There could be other things, particularly relationship with food and what we put into our physical body could cause the body to have anxiety from nowhere, from like, I don't know why I have it. You might, as an adult with an anxious attachment style, struggle to build yourself back up when something bad happens. So if you're fired, or if somebody dies, or if you have a loss, or you somehow get embarrassed, it feels devastating often for people with an anxious attachment style. It feels like shattering, like you've been a mirror shattered into a million pieces. There's no way it'll ever be put back together, is what often people think when they have this sort of attachment. By the way, secure people with a secure attachment map, if those things happen to you, you sort of inwardly know that you'll be able to get a new job or find a new partner or grieve appropriately for the loss and then move on and, actually maybe even be stronger because of it. Sort of an anti-fragile sort of view of yourself. Whereas the anxious view is very fragile. It's like any little thing that you don't get control over or that just befalls you because of life unfolding can be just devastating. And you feel just like there's no resiliency built in often. The anxious attachment style often just feels like and looks like, in terms of our thinking patterns, worry-based thinking. There's a tendency in relationships to being clingy or needy or smothering. And, I don't like labeling people, obviously. I don't think we should be like comfortable with labeling folks, but you might have heard that from your partners or your friends. in relationships? And if you did, let's just take a moment to recognize, well, maybe there is some truth to that. Maybe there is a sense that I'm my attachment style is really sort of like making me be clingy or needy or smothering to get my attachment needs sort of met. Coping addictions, so the way you cope with this always bubbling anxiety might be something like food. So it could go either way: overeating, undereating, shopping, or as sometimes people call it, retail therapy. But has become less of a therapy and more of like an addiction. People pleasing is very common, and of course, this is the foundational pattern that you see in codependent adult relationships. It's the anxious attachment combined with the dismissing attachment, and you have the perfect sort of classic example of codependent relationships. I'm not saying all, but that's a very common pattern. You might be addicted to Xanax. You might need something to just like calm you down. It could be alcohol or marijuana or anything else, but it might be like I need it to feel normal type of scenario, right? Okay, if we put it into the diagnostic world of the mental health space, you might have had a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, dependent personality disorder, major depression disorder, and there of course can be others, but those would be the most common ones. You may have had eating disorders. That's pretty common in the anxious attachment domain. Okay, so that is an adult with anxious attachment style. It's not going to be all those things. It's going to be some of those things. This pattern will play out with your children, with your friends, with your partners, with your therapist. It'll sort of play out in all directions, as your attachment patterns do, because they're as attachment styles do, because it has to do with all your relationships with other human beings. So why wouldn't it play out with your friends just as it does with your intimates? Now, as we grow and change and have new experiences, our attachment maps could look differently with different people. So that's very common, but you will typically have a foundational attachment style, and then you may have a couple other, like occasionally, like when I'm really at my worst, I'll go into this other attachment style, or when I'm really at my best, I'll go into a secure attachment style. So that is very common. What we're trying to hone in on is the one attachment model that you typically have, or is your core attachment model. Okay, so the dismissing. This is an adult, right? So this adult might be sort of like a workaholic. They might feel like a fraud or have an imposter syndrome. Now, you wouldn't necessarily know that about somebody, but deep down inside, they might think, gosh, if anybody finds out the true me, they'll know I'm just like, I don't deserve this job. I don't deserve this amount of money. This relationship is a sham, but nobody knows. It's like they feel like they're an imposter and they're going to get caught. They may, and often do, have control issues, especially around emotional control, and they may have had many short relationships, so permanent bachelor type scenario here. They might feel empty or void inside. If you ask them what's at their inner core, they might say just like a void or an emptiness. Sort of a nihilistic worldview can stem from this sort of attachment style. They may be married, but sort of distant and cold within the relationship, particularly around when the other partner needs emotional needs to be met. This is true of children too. When the child needs their emotional needs to be met, this is the moment that this parent who with a dismissing attachment has to sort of pull back, and they just can't allow themselves to go there. So again, you can imagine a child being praised for their beauty or their sports ability or their educational aptitude or their academic aptitude or something like that. But when the child really needs like vulnerable, sensitive connection with another human, this parent with a dismissing attachment is going to really struggle and most likely not be able to provide that for the child. When triggers occur, they may sort of isolate or leave. So this is more of like the dissociation sort of survival strategy rather than the fight and flight. Now, they may also engage in fighting behavior, yelling, violence, because that's an emotional control tactic, is to get louder, get bigger, get more abusive, etc. And this is often the domain of abusive sort of relationships that are almost going to come from the dismissing or the disorganized attachment models, because there's such a need to control the emotional sort of scene that anything works, right? So shutting down works, ghosting works, dissociation works, but also violence and control, lying, yelling, etc. All these things may add to that. So coping addictions might be to things like alcohol, so sort of a dissociative and a numbing effect. There might be like really high sex drive, and it's not really a sex drive, it's more about a control. It's like at that control aspect of sex that sometimes is there. Gambling might be very common. Cocaine, more of an upper, sort of a building one up. Work, like a workaholic, just go always at work, etc. General control techniques, and violence often comes from this domain as well. And if we had to put it into the diagnostic framework, we would say this is the land of narcissistic personality disorder. Now, you can have a dismissing attachment style and not have a diagnosable personality disorder. So don't get me wrong here. But if you find and you have somebody in your life that has a narcissistic personality disorder that is like an accurate diagnosis, they're almost guaranteed to have a dismissing attachment style, because that's where it came from. Antisocial personality disorder. So that gets us into the land of like serial killers and psychopaths and sociopaths. It's often comes from the dismissing attachment style, especially the antisocial one, but it often comes too from disorganized. And I would say more commonly comes from the disorganized attachment, that you get like serial killer pathologies or psychopathic pathologies. Schizoid personality disorder, that's sort of the retreat personality disorder into the imaginative realm. So these folks can be sort of daydreamy and just like disconnect from society, disconnect from reality very, very easily as a coping mechanism. And then, of course, major depressive disorder. They just feel because of that emptiness and that void inside. Okay, so that kind of covers a big swath, doesn't cover all of it. As a parent, again, they may be like sort of cold with their child when the child really needs emotional connection, but supportive of the child in other sort of like more material ways. Okay, disorganized attachment as an adult. This may look like chronic suicidality or chronic self-harming. So not just like I had one suicide attempt or I tried self-harming a few times, but like I cannot stop self-harming, or I cannot stop thinking about suicidality or attempting suicidality. So this typifies the disorganized attachment model. They may have relationships that are sort of explosively amazing, like sometimes it's called love bombing. Like there's just so much love, so much like, oh my gosh, this person is my everything. But then they can go into a terrifying zone as well of big fights, throwing things, breaking things, yelling, like self-harming, suicide attempts, all within the context of the relationship. So it can have this like total like euphoria, but also total terrifying dysphoria. They may internally feel just broken or worthless, or like, again, what is the point? Because remember, their self-concept is negative view of self, negative view of other. They feel like there's nowhere to go for safety, nowhere to go for feeling easement of their wound, of their deep wounds, of their deep fears. And so they feel just inherently broken or inherently unvaluable or worthless. They might be called within relationships crazy or messed up, or, you know, like you're insane, things like that. I'm not saying that is okay to call somebody. It could be just so unpredictable for the other partner that the other partner might be like, you're crazy, I don't know how to deal with it. And addictions might be things like self-harm. So self-harm is often becomes addictive because it actually is a way to sort of like soothe that pain of feeling like you're just floating with no support, no help, rock in a hard place. There is no relief, right? Well, self-harm often gives that relief for individuals. Drama, so needing to have drama, so causing drama where there really wasn't any. Opioids, sort of the numbing effect of things like heroin or fentanyl. Suicidal thoughts and suicidal attempts as addictions, as coping mechanisms, right? Suicide isn't something to be afraid of per se. It's something to understand, and to understand suicide, you have to understand it as the ultimate coping skill. It is the ultimate way out. It's the trump card, right? It's like, hey, when all else fails, when the cutting fails, when the drinking fails, when the drama fails, I can ultimately end the pain by taking myself out of the picture, right? And so you might become addicted to that. It might become something you can't live without for a period of time until we do the deep inner work to sort of heal the exiled parts of ourselves, the wounded child parts of ourselves, and reparent ourselves. We rebuild, basically. The way out of all this is to rebuild our attachment models to build a secure attachment model, which you can do for yourself. You don't need anybody else to do it. Now, therapy is helpful, and good friends are helpful, and family members are helpful. But if you don't have any of it, it is something you can rebuild in yourself, and it takes 6 months to 2 years, depending on how hardcore you go with the building. So it's interesting. It takes the same amount of time to build an attachment map at the beginning of life as it does to then repair or change your attachment map at any point as an adult. Okay, back to disorganized. If we diagnosed this attachment style, the diagnoses that would most commonly come up are borderline personality disorder. If you've ever known anybody with borderline personality disorder, that again is correctly diagnosed, almost guarantee 99% of the time, I would be willing to say this comes directly from a disorganized attachment model and just a pure chaos home. Addiction issues, so like it doesn't matter what it is, it could be sex, gambling, drugs, alcohol, it doesn't matter. The addiction issues come from the chaos at early childhood in the attachment model, and then the desire, the deep need to quell that pain, that wound, that chaos. And of course, the one could just be diagnosed with depression or anxiety. Okay, so that was a look at how the parents and the caregivers set this up in the child. So thinking of yourself as a 0 to 2-year-old, but then also as an adult, 18 to however old, how this plays out throughout our relationships. I hope you found that that was a useful sort of way to understand the world. To me, attachment has totally shifted the way I view diagnoses, the mental health space in general, because it's so formative. It is often the bedrock. Like the analogy I give is if you're building a house, you have to have a solid foundation or the house is all janky and nothing works within it, right? And that solid foundation in our psyche space is really attachment. It's that attachment zone that really sets up our foundation so that we can build a domicile worth living in, aka a psyche worth living in, that isn't just constantly catching fire, constantly falling down, or letting water in from the rain, etc. Hopefully you get my analogy there. Anyway, I hope that was useful. Please comment and like and subscribe if you made it this far into the video, but really particularly comment. I would love to hear, how does this resonate with you? What attachment styles are you noticing in yourself or others? And how does this help you make sense of your own mental health struggles, if at all? If you'd like the free 60-page ebook that I wrote called The Owner's Manual Part 2, it's got a bunch of stuff in attachment in it, and it's got a bunch more stuff too in the 4 big domains that I focus on here in this channel, which is the biological, the spiritual, the social, and the psychological. And that's what we've been talking about today, the psychological domain attachment. So it's in the link below. Just click it. It's yours. It's free. It's my way of saying thank you for watching this video. And on that note, thank you guys very much for watching this video. I really appreciate you. I will see you in the next video. Take care out there. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.